I wanted to tell you guys a little bit about how I got started in all of this, and just to tell you my story. I started working at Acorn in October of 2005. I had come up from Birmingham, Alabama, where I had been working previously, but I wanted to come back to D.C. I've been up there as an intern with the American Bar Association, and I thought that being an intern is an interesting type of thing because I was unpaid, so I was having $300 lunches in Northwest D.C., and I was going home to Southeast D.C. and living. And if anyone's ever been in Southeast D.C., they know it's two parts of the capital. There's the part you see on the tours, and there's the part where the black communities are. And that's where I lived. And I got to see that there was this big disparity between income levels. So I decided, of course, being a liberal, that I wanted to change that. I wanted to work in these communities, and I didn't want to just focus on overseas and international issues as I had before. So I started looking around for a group that was working directly in these communities, and that's how I found Acorn. They claimed that they were out there working directly with the people to create social change, and that they were doing it for the good of the communities, and that it was something that was honorable. So I signed up. I was so excited. I packed up all of my stuff, and I moved from Alabama to Washington, D.C., and I started working in their office right here on Capitol Hill. The first day I got there, number one, I found out that I wasn't just working for Acorn. I was working for Project Vote. And if many people remember, Project Vote is the organization that Obama worked for in the 90s. It is closely affiliated with Acorn. It's basically the same organization. So while I was getting paid out of a C3, which is in tax-exempt funds, I was working directly with campaigns and candidates through Acorn. One of my first tasks when I got there in 2005 was to investigate the voter fraud allegations that came out of the 2004 election. I don't know if you guys remember this, but there was a very strong anti-Bush sentiment going on during this time. Soros pumped millions of dollars into organizations like America Coming Together and America Votes to get out there and to get John Kerry elected. And because of that, there was massive allegations of fraud across the country. As I started investigating, I found out something very interesting. It seemed like no matter what state the people were in, whether it be Pennsylvania or Missouri, they all did the same thing. And Acorn would claim that it was just one rogue employee that was defrauding the organization, and they had nothing to do with it. You know, people like Mickey Mouse and the starting lineup of the Dallas Cowboys, and 16 people registered at a park bench. These were the types of things that we saw in that election cycle. Acorn prosecuted those employees and threw them under the bus. Most of the time they were crackheads, ex-felons, and people of low moral character that they had picked up off the streets. So when they got arrested or caught for these voter fraud shenanigans, Acorn could claim ignorance. This happened over and over again in states across the country. In Missouri in 2005, 9 Acorn employees were indicted for voter fraud. Pennsylvania, Ohio, Florida. In Ohio, they closed the office down right ahead of prosecution and shipped everything to D.C. And that was a gold mine for me. And that's also when I started to realize what I was dealing with. Being young and idealistic, you really don't understand the workings of a nonprofit until you've been there for a while. But being there, I got to see the fact that not only where the money was going, but what the end goal was. It wasn't to help people. It wasn't to end poverty. They weren't fighting for the money. The money was in the fight. They were getting money to say that they were going out there and helping folks. If they actually did anything in these communities, they wouldn't get millions of dollars every year that they were getting from the federal government and from grants from across the country. So, but me, I was a staunch. And when I say liberal, I mean radical liberal. There's an article in Politico's website from 2006. It talks about a protest outside the Federal Reserve. They say that there's this woman on the bullhorn screaming, yelling at people in traffic, and there's a baby sleeping in a stroller wearing an Acorn t-shirt. The baby was mine, and that was me on the bullhorn, out there obstructing traffic with Acorn, protesting foreclosures, and just basically riling up the people at the Federal Reserve. I was really committed to what we were doing. So you start to look the other way. You see things that are going on in the organization, and you know it's wrong, but you're doing it for the movement and for the fight. And it's not really about, some of the things that get lost along the way. So that was 2005. By 2007, I was working with some of the top leaders at Acorn, sitting in on meetings with Sandy Newman, who Barack Obama called his good friend, one of his mentors. And I got to see that they had a strategic plan for 08. As far back as 2006, SEIU had documents that were talking about Obama in '08 and what they were going to do to take over the presidency. And that's when I started to get worried. I called an organization called the Employment Policies Institute. They run a site called RodneyAcorn.com. And I told them some of the things that were going on within the organization and that I was worried about where we were headed. They told me that going up against Acorn was very hard, and what I should probably do, since I had just had a child, was to wait until after I got out of the organization and come back. The guy I talked to was a man named Brett Jacobson. That was the first, and he writes over in big government. That was my first interaction with the right. And did he try to mine me for information or put me in danger? No. He was worried about my safety and my security and told me to come back, where anyone else probably would have jumped in and said, okay, what do you got on Acorn? So they let me know that there was a door there, but I wasn't ready to walk through it. So I continued working at Acorn, and I decided that I was going to try to change it from the inside. One of the things that they always did is when they put issues out there, they always wanted to divide the country. It was always a poor black issue. One day we had to do a press conference on foreclosures, so they told us to go out and find citizens that had been affected by foreclosures. We found a 70-year-old white doctor who lived in Virginia, who paid his mortgage on time, and who just didn't understand the paperwork they had given him. We brought him back to the Acorn office, and they freaked out. And they told us, go, and this, honest to goodness, go find someone, find the most toothless black person you can, and bring them back to the office. We don't want white people on TV. We need black folks, real black folks. And when they said toothless, they meant toothless. They meant people that weren't able to communicate so they could perpetuate these stereotypes of these issues within the black community. It was all about raising the racial flag and making things divided. They never wanted to go organize in middle-class communities. They wanted to stay in these communities and to keep us divided, to make it not only a class war, but a race war. And those were the type of things that I was doing in 2007, leading up to the election. Then one day we go off to a meeting. We have these retreats every year, and we would go off and do strategic planning. And at the one, it was in Arkansas, at the ranch, they call it Slocatee John, but they call it Petty Jane because we're Southern. So we were up there one day, and Zach Paulette, who's the executive director of Project Vote and also of Acorn Political, he got up in front of the group, and he told us that he supervised Barack Obama in the 90s, and that Acorn produces leaders. So he was telling us as regular organizers, Acorn workers, that we too could be the next president of the United States. So we sat there at that meeting and passed what I like to call Acorn's Socialist Wish List. This included cap and trade, environmental justice issues, card check, I can go down the list here, universal health care, all of the things that we saw Obama trying to push during his first 100 days, these were the things that they wanted passed. And one of the things, I'm just going to interject right now, one of the things they never counted on was the Tea Party. They really thought these things were going to go right through. So we're sitting there at these meetings and we're planning this. And then 2 weeks later, I'm at my desk in Washington, D.C., and I get a call from the Obama campaign. And they were trying to make sure that it was the right Project Vote, because there's also a Project Vote Smart, and we would get their mail and their phone calls too. So once I verified that it was the Project Vote that he worked with in the 90s, he told me he wanted to talk to someone. The guy on the phone told me he wanted to talk to someone in my leadership. I sent out an email to Zach Paulette, Karen Gillette, Nathan Henderson James, and a couple of other of the top Acorn leaders. What I got back was a response that was not on email, but verbally, telling me I never should have sent that email, that there shouldn't have been any type of paper trail. And at the same time that she told me that, she gave me a black and white USB drive that contained the second quarter Obama donor list from 2007. And she told me she wanted me to go in there and target the maxed out presidential donors who could no longer give to Obama, but who could give to Acorn because Acorn was going to get Obama elected. That's when I knew that I had a big problem. Because as a Democrat, I still had grown up Catholic, I went to Catholic schools, I had a strong sense of moral values. And I'm like, if my team is cheating, are we really winning? And that's when I realized that I had to do something. So what I tried to do was to go and let someone know what was going on. I talked to some people within the organization about why we were out there coordinating with the campaign. Wasn't this considered to be illegal? And I was told to keep my head down and just to keep working because we had to get Obama elected. If we didn't get Obama elected, we weren't going to be able to pass the initiatives that were going to help these communities and they were talking about, just like you saw with universal health care, the debate, it was all about these human faces. People are dying here unless we pass this bill. That's the same type of logic that was presented to me. And you know what? For a while, I believed it. I really thought that if we didn't do this, if Obama didn't get elected, that people were going to die. People were not going to be helped. And it's the same type of heartstrings that they put on all the time, because with liberals, it's never about logical thought. It's always about how you feel, what your emotions, how you can tie those emotions into things that get people motivated to go out and do things that they wouldn't normally do. People that are good, honest individuals. There's a little joke that if you stay at Acorn longer than a year, you're going to go and watch. Because you start off as an idealist, and then you realize what they're doing, and you have a choice. Either you can continue to look the other way and work through this, or you become what they call, you leave, or you become what they call a true believer. Once you're a true believer, you're totally trusted within your organization, because they know you'll go out and recruit other young idealistic people and bring them in and get them to do the same thing that you're doing. So that's where I was in 2007 and leading into 2008. By July of 2008, the New York Times had come out with an article. I don't know how many of you guys remember the Acorn embezzlement scandal, where his brother embezzled $1 million from the organization. I had tried through several channels, I had talked to people, and they all told me you could not go up against Acorn and win. So I contacted the New York Times after that article came out in July of 2008 and became a confidential informant. I sent them documents, emails, phone records, everything that they would need to realize that Acorn was not only a subversive organization, but they were illegally working with the Obama campaign. Every time an article came out, it seemed to be more watered down than the other. And I would get some excuse like I didn't have enough space, or we're still investigating that. And this went on for months. So from July of 2008 to October of 2008, a number of stories came out in the New York Times about Acorn, and they were each more watered down than the other. Then one day, the reporter, Stephanie Strong, was coming to D.C. to get proof that Obama had been coordinated with Acorn. She had independently verified meetings, not only from me, but from other sources of connections and collusions between the campaign, and she was ready to write the story. My daughter, at the time, was 2, and she had gotten into my makeup, and she was all messy and stuff, so I had to put her in the bath. And I'm so glad that I had to put her in the bath, because that day I missed the phone call, and it went to voicemail. And when I checked the voicemail, it was the New York Times reporter, Stephanie Strong, telling me that her editors had told her to stand down from the story. When I called her back, she told me that it was not the policy of the New York Times to print a game changer that close to the election for either side. Now keep in mind that I was willing to come out and be publicly identified, and they had just ran a story about McCain using anonymous sources saying he was having an affair, but they didn't want to print a game-changing article for Obama. So I didn't know what to do. And so I contacted, of all people, Michelle Malkin. Now, when I say of all people, because Michelle Malkin terrified me. I was looking at her site and I was going, oh my God, she's crazy. Leave me to do this stuff. But she was the only person that seemed to get it. And she didn't, and I would talk to her in 2009 and she would tell me that she kicked herself, that she never got that email. But everybody sends hundreds of emails to her address. So I contacted a lawyer in Pennsylvania, and I ended up testifying against Acorn in a case that was brought before the state court about their illegal voter registration activities. Part of the documents that were submitted into evidence was the 2007 Obama donor list. This list was more complete than the one he gave to the FEC. And there was no way it could have been downloaded from the internet, because Obama never turned over his donors under $200. We had all of that information. We had not only the lower dollar, $25 donors, but we had the donors whose credit cards had been rejected and the money had come back to the campaign. We had all of that right there, and it was turned into evidence. It was so big that we couldn't even print it out. We had to put it on 2 CDs and give it to the judge. We had press there from across the country. They all interviewed me, and you know what? There was no stories that came out of that. CNN did a 3-tape interview that never aired. ABC News and Martha Raddatz had the story. They were able to verify the list, and they still spiked it. And this was right leading up to the election. No one in the mainstream media wanted to cover this story because it meant that Obama had lied about his connections to Acorn, and that this was something that could possibly blow up pretty big. Fox News was the only people that were willing to even talk to me, so I went on the Laura Ingraham show, but it just never got enough traction to where it made a difference. So, Election Day 2008, me still being a liberal, thinking that Obama was a good person and that he was just being trapped by Acorn that were trying to sway him. And I felt like I was doing my job by exposing by exposing Acorn, but I still voted for Obama. And like most election days, it rained that day in D.C. And I took my daughter out there and we voted in the rain, and I felt like I was doing something for America. And that quickly changed come January 2009. And that's really when I became an ex-liberal, because I started to look at who Obama was picking. You know, I worked in American Rights at Work, and Hilda Solis was the treasurer of American Rights at Work. She was given the position of Labor Secretary with the express purpose of passing card check. Catherine Sebelius, who was the governor of Kansas, I was there in D.C. when she took the state of Kansas' plane to D.C. to accept an award from Andy Stern and to hobnob with union officials on the taxpayers' dime. She was given the role of Health and Human Services Secretary, once again to pass universal health care. Then you've got Leon Panetta and his ties to the Communist Party and the Democratic Socialists of America. As I started seeing who he was picking for his cabinet, I realized there was no way that this guy could be a nice guy, because everybody he was picking was subversive. And that's when I was like, you know what, I'm done, I'm through. And I became an ex-liberal. I didn't want to become a Republican, no offense to anyone, but I just knew I didn't want to be a Democrat anymore, and I knew I was tired and I was confused and I didn't want to go anywhere else, so I just came up with the term in my head, I'm an ex-liberal. And that's where I tell And that's why I tell people all the time, that's where the power of social media comes in. I was a young woman growing up in Birmingham, Alabama, a Democrat all my life. In my house, we had two pictures. It was Jesus and JFK. I had never really had any interaction with Republicans or conservatives. My inner circle had always been liberal. So getting on Twitter, and I'm tweeting out my stories about Acorn, and I'm talking about corruption, and people start following me and responding back, and I'm like, is that conservative laughing at my joke? You think I'm funny? You know, it never occurred to me that I would have anything in common with a 67-year-old conservative woman out of Ohio or, somewhere else. It never clicked. But I started making friends, and I started talking to people, and they were the ones that pulled me into the Tea Party movement. I signed up with Smart Girl Politics. I was working with the Patriot Caucus, American Majority. There was a number of groups that were just getting their sea legs right around that time in 2009. And those were the groups that I joined up with. And I realized that all of those things that I wanted to do about helping people, I could not do it on the left, but I could do it with these folks because they were honest, they pulled me in, they were nice to me. And for the first time, I realized that the racism that I kept expecting wasn't coming from the right, it was coming from the left. They told me when I spoke at CPAC in 2009 that they had never seen a coon at a Klan party until they saw me on the CPAC stage. They called me Aunt Jemima, they called me Uncle Tom, they, death threats, they sent things to my blog, they put my daughter's picture on the internet and was trying to make me out to be a bad mom. All of these things came from the left just because I changed my mind and said I didn't want to be a Democrat anymore and that I wanted to expose what they were doing. That's when I started realizing that all this time I had been programmed. And when you realize you've been programmed, number one, it's kind of like your whole life changes. Friends, my family members have befriended me on Facebook. My friends have pulled away from me. The friends that I really have been with all my life were telling me, oh, Acorn's going to bring their big guns out for you. I can't believe that you're over there being brainwashed by these folks. And I'm like, no, I think I was brainwashed by you guys. Mm-hmm. But it was a process that took a long time for me to get to. And even now, I still struggle with it because I'm trying to reconcile the way I grew up and what I believe with where I am now. But you can't be with a group that's trying to destroy your country. And everything they did with Acorn, it was never about socialism. They never mentioned the word socialism because most blacks do not agree with socialism. They talked about what's fair, what's right, giving money back to the people, redistributing wealth. These are the key words and catchphrases that they use to get folks involved, not realizing that when you say you're fighting capitalism, that means that you're socialist. But it never clicked. But those are the things that were great about Acorn, that they fought capitalism, that they were out there trying to spread the wealth around. The things that people never really talked about all led back to socialism. And it was only after I got out of the organization that I started seeing just how subversive it was. And that's just what they're doing in the communities. We're not even talking about what they've done to our electoral system and what they're still doing. If you think Acorn has gone underground and has disbanded, you're completely wrong. If you were to go search right now on Google, Acorn Canada, you would see all the protests that have gone on in the past 2 weeks. They're replicating the model that they did here in the United States in Canada, and eventually they're going to be in the same situation we're in now. Project Vote, Obama's old employee, they're still out there doing the same things, chipping away at our electoral system. They've sued several states, including Texas, to get more voter registration cards into public assistance places. But the Judicial Watch, I can't say the word, just came out with documents showing that when they did this in Colorado, the number of fraudulent registrations was double the national average. This is how they chip away at our electoral system, putting things in place so where they can go in and make chaos and controversy at the ballot on election day. Same thing with some of the things they're working on right now with illegal immigration. We have to be aware that it's not just voter registration, it's not just black people. They are trying to change, fundamentally change, as Obama said, our entire society, and they're very effective at it because they're long-range planners. While we're trying to win an election cycle, they're trying to make a permanent Democrat majority for the next 40 years. And I won't even say Democrat because it's more progressive or radical liberal than anything else. Wade Rathke, the founder of Acorn, is over in the Philippines, Indonesia, Canada, Kenya. I could name a host of other areas, Nigeria, where Acorn is trying to replicate the model. And what happens when you meddle around in international affairs is that you create instability. There was even ties that show that Acorn was over in Egypt right around the time they were having these riots. All of that is a national security issue for us because it makes us less safe when there's all this fighting going on across the world. So that's where I am right now. So what we've been doing for the past year now is moving out from exposing Acorn to talking about what we can do as conservatives, how we can get out there. We're teaching the tactics of the left to conservatives and putting them in the same communities that we have ignored for so long. We can't take back America and ignore areas that look like, I call them liberal fallout zones, because it looks like somebody dropped a bomb there and just left. And these are the communities where they've been for 30 years. So imagine if we start to get out there, and as Michelle Obama said, that her husband wasn't going to let us go back to our normal lives. Well, it's true. So we get out there in these communities and we show that conservatives being in these areas, we've done more in the past year than Democrats have done in 40 plus years. That's where we are now. We're going to take back America and take back our country. We have to take it back block by block, city by city. We can't trust these people to do the job we thought they were doing. During the Bush years, during the Reagan years, how do you think Acorn was getting funded? We trusted them to do the job, and they were taking Republican money and going out there and registering Democrats and weakening our society. Since we can't trust them, we have to form our own organizations based on conservative values and principles and get out there in those communities and show them that it's not handouts, it's prosperity and capitalism. That's the only proven pathway out of poverty. So that's what we're working on now, and that's one of the things that we're doing here in Texas. I've been working in Sheila Jackson Lee's district for the past year, trying to get her out of there, and we figured out just recently. We figured out just recently that the only way we're going to do it is to run a social conservative Democrat in the primary. And I go back to Ronald Reagan's principle of 80%. If we can get you to agree with us on 80% of the issues, we can work on the rest. Because in those communities, there are folks that would rather die than to vote R in Congressional District 18. But if we get someone in there and fire her in the primary, those are the type of things we're probably going to have to do with Harry Reid and some of these other folks across the country that are getting 73+% in the general election against a conservative or Republican candidate. We're thinking outside of the box and using their own tactics against them. That's why I'm glad to be here tonight with people that are energetic and are committed to doing this, because we've got the fight of our lives coming up next year. And I thank you guys for having me. If we've got a little time, I'll open it up to a couple of questions. Yes?
You don't have to wait 3 years. You're among friends tonight.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Do we have any other questions before I turn it over to my friend, Brandon Darby?
You said you had a lot of resistance. Have you been able to get any of your friends or family to understand your story and come over to your side?
Now that's the funny thing, because my mom Committed Democrat. She had the picture of Obama with the sunglasses, getting off Air Force One, and he's looking back over his shoulder like that, and she would kiss at it every day. And she kept telling me he had presidential swagger. It took me 2.5 years and Obama saying something bad about her, the post office where she works, before she really started listening. But she comes to me one day after she'd been really listening to what he's saying, and she goes, you know what? I think he's a socialist. And I didn't fell off my chair. I'm like, really? It only took me 2.5 years. But yeah, I pulled over some of my family members and my friends, and it's one Democrat at a time, actually. I've had them when they fight on my Facebook page and they friend me or they'll come back, but the ones that really are successful are the ones that are going to listen to you. Some folks you can't save, but I've learned to just keep hammering at it. And that's what I've learned also working in these communities, is that when you meet people one-on-one and you talk about the issues and you take politics out of it, they find themselves agreeing with me. And then at the end of the conversation, I was like, you know, you're more conservative than you realize. And then I just leave it at that. I let them go home and I ponder that, and then I start feeding them information, and eventually they come around. But it's taken a while, but I've learned it's very effective. When we go in these communities, we don't go talking politics. We go talking values, American values, the core values that people need to vote. And I tell people, it doesn't matter. Don't vote your party, vote your values. And when you talk to people like that, they start to think, because you're not pressuring them to do anything. You're not saying vote for this candidate or, you know, denounce Obama. Just vote with your heart. And one of the things I learned recently, I asked a group of black people, if Obama wasn't black, would you even consider re-electing him? And it was dead silence. And people were just thinking about it. And finally, they, you know, very quietly started acknowledging that, you know, if he was anyone else, he wouldn't even get a second chance in office. So we're getting there. Any other questions? Well, thank you guys for having me out.